What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office breakdown for Sunday, February 15th, but keep in mind it is a holiday weekend and studios do count it as a 4-day weekend, so the numbers will be modified a bit by tomorrow. But for now, it looks like the big Valentine's Day gift to lovers of lurid, sultry, passionate melodramas, Wuthering Heights, is going to have a roughly $33 million 3-day opening in North America and could potentially go as high as $40 million by tomorrow. However, Warner Brothers rivals are a little more skeptical and claim the movie will settle around $35 million for the 4-day weekend. Abroad, the movie fared pretty well, coming in the low 40s. So when you compare all these numbers to the roughly $80 million budget, plus the tens of millions that Warner Brothers spent on marketing, the question is, did director Emerald Fennell and producer Margot Robbie make the right choice going with Warner Brothers, who promised them a theatrical release, versus Netflix, who offered a $150 million budget with no theatrical release of any kind? Let's discuss. So one of the main reasons people are following this story very closely is that it ties in directly to Netflix's ongoing attempts to buy Warner Brothers. Because even if Netflix buys Warner Brothers and maintains it as like a brand and a standalone entity, I can't imagine there would be a scenario where Emerald Fennell in the future would be able to say, oh, I'm turning down the $150 million to make this movie for Netflix, and instead I'm going to shop it over at Warner Brothers, because Netflix would say, well, we own Warner Brothers, so we're not going to make you the offer from Warner Brothers. So it starts to illustrate how the options for filmmakers would be more limited. However, at the exact same time that Warner Brothers is releasing Wuthering Heights in theaters, we're also seeing a big digital player with their own digital platform, Prime Video, aka Amazon, kind of not necessarily crashing and burning with Crime 101, but Amazon's trying to do the opposite of what Netflix is doing. Amazon's offering a big theatrical push for a lot of movies this year. And if anything, if Warner Brothers were to be absorbed by Netflix, you might see Amazon trying to increase their spend theatrically to kind of fill the void that is being left. Because if Warner Brothers is absorbed by Netflix, there will be more gaps and more openings on the theatrical calendar. So it's interesting when you compare Netflix versus Amazon Prime Video versus Apple TV. It's interesting seeing how all the big tech players are offering a slightly different value proposition for their customers. Like Apple's going to do a sequel to F1, but it's going to be a while before we see that. But Apple seems to be content to release one big theatrical movie every once in a while. Netflix would offer no theatrical of any kind if not for the fact that filmmakers refuse to work with them sometimes in the absence of theatrical. Like Greta Gerwig in her upcoming Chronicles of Narnia movie. She was not willing to make it for Netflix unless Netflix was willing to commit to a big IMAX push, at least for a couple of weeks. But like, will Christopher Nolan ever make a movie for Netflix? Or would Steven Spielberg ever make a movie for Netflix? Or would Quentin Tarantino ever make a movie for Netflix? Although, to be fair, Quentin Tarantino is kind of indirectly making a movie for Netflix because David Fincher has his upcoming movie about Cliff Booth, which is obviously based on the character that Quentin Tarantino invented for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But it all boils down to this question of whether or not the individual filmmakers value the theatrical experience. Like, is a movie if it never plays in theaters? Like, at that point, is it just content? It's a little bit like straight-to-video movies back in the 1990s. There were a lot of trashy movies that went straight to VHS, or even a lot of anime in the 1980s that went straight to VHS, but we still think of them as movies. So I don't completely disregard online movies as just content. Like, I think there will be some examples of some online movies that do really, really well, that come to be regarded as great classic movies in spite of the fact that they never had a theatrical release. But let's set aside for a moment all artistic considerations, and let's set aside any romantic notions that filmmakers might have about the shared experience about watching a movie in a theater. Business-wise, is it a good idea to put a movie in theaters with a big, robust marketing spend just to build awareness, even if the goal is to drive eyeballs to either Prime Video or Apple TV or Netflix? And Apple will tell you yes, if the theatrical release can cover the marketing cost. And Amazon seems to be embracing a similar philosophy as well. Where if you make a movie like Crime 101 for $90 million, which is a ton of money, is it justified if it can gross just enough in theaters to cover the marketing costs so that when it appears on Prime Video later on and people are, doom scrolling through all the various options, like, oh, Chris Hemsworth, Halle Berry, Mark Ruffalo, I recognize all these people. Oh, that was that crime movie that came out a little while ago. Let's check that out. Like, does it give the movie some long-term value where it just feels more tactile, more tangible, more real, as opposed to something that's just a thumbnail that you've never heard of? But if that were the case, as opposed to just marketing mumbo-jumbo, and to be fair, marketers do love to employ a little mumbo-jumbo just to justify their positions. I studied marketing in business school, and at the time, somebody gave me a great phrase, or introduced me to a great phrase about all the efforts when it comes to marketing departments They compared it to hammering Jell-O against the wall. And a lot of that Jell-O is going to ooze on down. That's basically money wasted. But the little teeny tiny little like leftover bit of Jell-O on the nail, that is the marketing spend or the marketing effort that actually had like some real impact on the consumer and their decision-making process. Because if it were in fact the truth, that putting these movies in theaters, if you can just cover the marketing expense, that it does have long-term value, why would Netflix not in turn employ a similar approach for all their movies, as opposed to having their feet held to the fire by filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro, who said basically, I'm not making Frankenstein for you unless you give me a couple weeks in theaters like the Alamo Drafthouse. And the question for me when it comes to Netflix is their hostility to the theatrical experience based more on good sound business practices or more on some strange ideology embraced by Ted Sarandos? Because they do own a few theaters. They own the Paris here in New York. They own the Egyptian in LA for special screenings and special events and that sort of thing. But when you look at the subscription revenue of Netflix in 2025 versus all the theatrical revenue of all the big studios in 2025, Netflix generated about $40 billion in subscription revenue in 2025. Compare that to the North American box office, which came in a little bit under $9 billion. Is the theatrical experience something that still provides real value for film buffs, or is it basically an old-fashioned phenomenon that's in a state of structural decline? Because last week I saw 2 movies in the theater, and I would say that when I saw Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, the theatrical experience actually did add something to the movie, because I wasn't as into the movie as the rest of the crowd, but I'd say about half my crowd was like audibly clapping vigorously and laughing and cracking up, and I was like, oh, okay, this movie is having a real impact on at least some people who are really enjoying it, and I would not have had that additional perspective if not for the theatrical experience. But then when I saw Wuthering Heights, I don't know if I just sat too close to the screen or not, but I wasn't really watching or observing the crowd. And also, when you're watching like a tearjerker romance, like kind of a like a lurid love story, unless people are like audibly crying, it's hard to know how they're responding to the movie. I probably should have had like an infrared camera to see if girls were crying or whatever the case might be, because with Wuthering Heights, 75% of the audience, according to Variety, was women. But if you want to go big picture on Netflix and their potential acquisition of Warner Brothers, from Netflix's point of view, they'll tell people we're not competing with Disney or Sony or Universal or any of the traditional studios that create scripted content, basically shows and movies. Netflix will argue that they're competing with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, etc. and so forth. And to put that in perspective, YouTube in 2025 generated $60 billion in ad revenue. So compare the $60 billion of YouTube to the $40 billion of Netflix generated by subscribers versus the $9 billion generated by theatrical ticket sales. My own point of view, or perhaps just my own personal bias, is that there's a massive difference between scripted entertainment, basically shows and movies made for a good budget, versus user-generated content. This is user-generated content, and by this time tomorrow, the video would just kind of wash on down the river. But a good show or a good movie, that is art. It sticks around and lasts for decades. And whether Ted Sarandos likes it or not, right now at least, Netflix is in the business of creating scripted entertainment. I know they're starting to dabble in the world of podcasts and that sort of thing. And who knows, 5-10 years from now, maybe Netflix will be a hub where you can watch sports and user-generated content and shows and movies, and basically any kind of entertainment under the sun might be found on Netflix. And if so, then they could fully justify the idea that they're not competing with Disney and Sony and Paramount and Universal, but instead they are in fact competing with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, etc. But what's going to make this discussion even more complex is if more YouTubers like Markiplier, aka Mark Fishback, start making more scripted entertainment for both theaters as well as YouTube. Because a couple of weeks ago he released his movie Iron Lung. He made it for a couple million and it grossed like 18 or 19 million. For basically a YouTuber making a low budget movie, it was a smash success in theaters. So if YouTube starts seeing a lot more of its creators created scripted entertainment, that might feed ammunition to Ted Sarandos, who will claim that Netflix is not in fact competing with all the traditional studios, but they are in fact competing with YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. So let's bring all this full circle back to Wuthering Heights. Did Emerald Fennell and Margot Robbie make the right decision making this movie for $80 million for Warner Brothers as opposed to $150 million for Netflix? I guess it just depends. What are your goals with your career and what are you trying to extract from the entertainment industry? If you're just trying to extract as much money as humanly possible well, then they were fools. They should have taken the money and run. Like, look at Richard Linklater, one of the best independent filmmakers of the last 40, 50 years. He's made a ton of movies recently where he gives the movies to Netflix because they offer more money for his movies than anyone else. I would love to see Richard Linklater's movies getting robust theatrical releases. And even though Richard Linklater has all the artistic integrity in the world, in the end, he's an independent filmmaker and he's able to stay in business by selling his movies to Netflix. But when you look at the careers of director Emerald Fennell and Margot Robbie, what are their goals in the immediate future? And obviously Margot Robbie's chasing that Oscar. And if you're chasing that Oscar, well, then you have a better chance of winning that Oscar if you're doing a big, full-throated theatrical release for your movies. And Emerald Fennell, the big question is, do you want to be Christopher Nolan or do you want to be the Duffer Brothers? Because the Duffer Brothers have made a pile of money just making content for Netflix. But if you want to be Christopher Nolan, well then, yeah, she made the right decision going with Warner Brothers. And obviously Warner Brothers at this point, they're still kicking themselves that they managed to alienate Christopher Nolan and drive him away. So they're trying to be very filmmaker friendly. And if Netflix is successful in their attempts to absorb Warner Brothers, I do think it'll have a negative impact overall on like cinema as an art form. If for you, cinema as an art form is movies by people like Tarantino or Nolan or Denis Villeneuve, putting these big movies in the theater, movies that feel like movies as opposed to disposable content. But what I want to have happen for Warner Brothers is not going to happen. I want Warner Brothers to remain a standalone entity. But Warner Brothers has about $80 billion in debt, last I heard. And that's unless basically a benevolent trillionaire were to just swoop in and say, oh, I'm just going to take Warner Brothers off the hands of David Zaslav and just let Warner Brothers remain independent. But obviously Universal wants them, Paramount wants them, Netflix wants them. Somebody's going to absorb them. And I think you will see fewer movies in the theater like Wuthering Heights, like One Battle After Another, like Weapons, like Sinners, because over the last year, Warner Brothers has been making a big theatrical push for a lot of original movies or fresh original adaptations of classic books. And for me, that is what movies are all about, no matter what you might think about the individual movies.
So kiss me, and let us both be damned.
So long story short, in answer to my own question, I do think Margot Robbie and Emerald Fennell made the right choice going with Warner Brothers as opposed to Netflix if they're more concerned with glory as opposed to fortune. It's like the old phrase from the Indiana Jones movies, fortune and glory, kid, fortune and glory. What's more important to you, fortune or glory? And if you're chasing Oscars and prestige and a reputation as a great filmmaker, a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan, well then, yeah, they absolutely made the right call. But if you're just trying to extract money from the system and take the money and run, well then, yeah, they should have totally taken the deal with Netflix. But we can't close the books on Wuthering Heights until we see how it performs in its second and its third weekend, because a strange thing happened this past weekend. After months of hearing from all my sisters and my mother and basically every woman that I know that they were all planning on seeing Wuthering Heights in the theater, not one of them saw Wuthering Heights in the theater. I'm a 49-year-old guy. I went by myself and saw Wuthering Heights. How come I was there at the theater, but all the ladies in my life did not go? And they go, oh, I'm still planning on seeing it. I'm going to see it later on this week. Like, I'm going to see it the next weekend, blah, blah, blah. If girls want to see more, heartthrob romances in the theater, well, then you must vote with your dollars and actually go see the movies that you claim that you wish to see. I was frankly quite surprised by just how few women that I know went to see Wuthering Heights in its opening weekend. And anytime I hear older people complaining about how come they don't make movies like they used to, I want to say, bitch, because you didn't go when it was in the theater. You must vote with your dollars. You must incentivize people to continue making the movies that you want to see. But Wuthering Heights and Crime 101 were not the only new releases in the theater this weekend. Gore Verbinski returned to the screen after a 10-year hiatus or a 10-year absence with Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. And admittedly, the movie was only made for $10 million. But not a lot of people showed up. I think it opened in 7th place. Hang on, let me check the list over Deadline. Yeah, it opened in 7th with an estimated $4.1 million for the 4-day weekend, a $3.6 million for the 3-day, and for a guy who directed the first, second, and third Pirates of the Caribbean movies. My question is, how can a filmmaker enjoy so much success when he's dabbling in the world of big Disney franchises, but when he tries to make something more personal, more quirky, more individual, it just totally crashes and burns? Because I've never met a person in my life who says, oh, The Weatherman, that's my favorite Gore Verbinski movie, or, A Cure for Wellness, that's my favorite Gore Verbinski movie. People that are his fans like The Ring, which is a remake, and they like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, which are franchise movies. So it's like, as much as I might criticize remakes and franchises, if you want to stay in business, sometimes it's easier and better and more advisable to retreat to the comforting arms of Disney and make bland, forgettable, PG-13, family-friendly, product. And I hear people complaining all the time about how come we don't get more original science fiction movies? How come we don't get more R-rated comedies? Well, Gore Verbinski made a movie that is an R-rated original comedy hybrid with science fiction, and nobody went. So once again, you must vote with your dollars. If you want more original R-rated comedies and or science fiction movies, you must go when a filmmaker like Gore Verbinski basically comes out of retirement and puts one on the screen. And this applies to me as well, because there was an R-rated indie movie released by Neon this past weekend, which I did not see.
Oh my God. Matt, it's 2008.
I told you!
But I've heard that is absolutely fucking hilarious. Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, a movie which apparently has nothing to do with Nirvana, so I'm not quite sure why they chose that title. That might explain why not a lot of people went to see the movie. But this is from the guys who made the movie Blackberry, which I thought was a pretty good movie, which came out a couple of years ago. I will definitely be seeing Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, but the movie generated $1.2 million over the 3-day weekend on 365 screens, and it's estimated it'll generate $1.4 million across the 4-day weekend. And I think the reality is, if you want to make a weird, bizarre indie comedy, which has a strange concept that's hard to describe to people, 1 or 2 stars will go a long way, because obviously when it comes to Blackberry had Jay Baruchel as well as Glenn Howard in it, and I think that definitely helped Blackberry cut through the white noise of all the competing movies out there. But I think at this point I've shared enough of my own opinions. Let's get the opinions of the experts, courtesy of Rebecca Rubin over at Variety, with our article titled Box Office, Wuthering Heights leads with $40 million over holiday weekend. Crime 101 stumbles with $17.7 million against $90 million budget. Wuthering Heights, a steamy romantic drama starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi, is heating up the box office over Valentine's Day weekend. The R-rated film has debuted to $33 million from 3,682 North American theaters and is projected to earn $40 million through President's Day on Monday. Rivals believe the 4-day figure will be closer to $35 million. In a box office twist, Wuthering Heights enjoyed a bigger start at the international box office with $42 million from 76 territories for a global launch of $82 million. Since the initial domestic ticket sales are slightly softer than expected, the movie may rely on overseas audiences to justify its $80 million production budget, not including the tens of millions spent on the global promotional tour. Emerald Fennell wrote and directed Wuthering Heights, which is her third feature film following the Oscar-winning revenge thriller Promising Young Woman and ultra-provocative Saltburn. Netflix had offered to pay a staggering $150 million for Fennell's take on Emily Bronte's novel about a toxic couple in 18th century England. However, the filmmaker and producers, including Robbie, opted to take less money from Warner Brothers in exchange for a wide theatrical release and full-scale marketing campaign. The partnership resulted in the 9th consecutive #1 opening for Warner Brothers, following a string of hits such as a Minecraft movie, Sinners, Final Destination, Bloodlines, and Weapons. And let me interrupt real quick. Along those lines, we should also add that in a couple weeks, Warner Brothers has yet another movie coming to theaters, The Bride. So we'll see if their #1 hot streak can be sustained. But back to the article, they were right to want a theatrical release. It's paying off, says David A. Gross, who runs the movie consulting firm Franchise Entertainment Research. The classic material, good-looking actors, and steamy treatment are connecting. Business should be strong overseas thanks to Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. Like the spicy 50 Shades trilogy and rom-coms Isn't It Romantic and How to Be Single Before It, Wuthering Heights was the de facto choice for women around Valentine's Day. More than 75% of opening weekend crowds were women. However, they were mixed on the film, which earned a B grade on CinemaScore exit polls, so it's unclear what that'll mean for word of mouth. And let me interrupt again, because I've seen over the last couple of days a lot of reviews where people are just ripping the movie a new asshole, usually from the point of view of what a departure it is from the source material. I have not read the source material, so I cannot speak on that front. I basically gave the movie a positive review because I enjoyed it much more than I anticipated going into it. The only reason I went to see the movie is to have a more informed take on Netflix and Warner Brothers and the attempt at acquiring Warner Brothers. So it'll be very interesting to see over the next week or two if all the women over the last couple of months who claimed they wanted to see it actually will put their money where their mouth is and go to the theater and throw down their hard-earned money. But back to the article. Wuthering Heights towered over several newcomers, including the animated sports adventure Goat and heist thriller Crime 101 with Chris Hemsworth, Mark Ruffalo, and Barry Keoghan, I'm never quite sure how he pronounces his last name, two holdovers, survival thriller Send Help, and the Angel Studios rom-com Solo Mio rounded out the top 5. Goat debuted in second place with $26 million from 3,862 venues over the weekend and a projected $32 million through the 4-day holiday frame. It collected $15.6 million from 42 overseas markets, 60% of its international rollout, for a worldwide tally of $47.6 million. It's a respectable start for a challenging time for original animation. Disney's Pixar, considered the gold standard in animation, has particularly struggled to launch a new property in several years. Sony Pictures Animation, which produced Goat for $80 million, hopes the well-received sports story will become a slow and steady hit in the vein of recent Universal and DreamWorks properties that showed impressive box office endurance, including 2023's Migration, which opened at $12.7 million and eventually earned $300 million globally, and 2024's The Wild Robot, which debuted to $35 million and powered to $334 million worldwide. Directed by Tyree Dillahay and produced by NBA champ Steph Curry, Goat follows an anthropomorphic goat who aspires to become the greatest of all time at a basketball-esque sport called Roarball. Audiences, most of whom are families, gave the movie an A grade on CinemaScore exit polls, which bodes well for word of mouth. Plus, there won't be competition on the kid-friendly front until Pixar's Hoppers arrives in March. Crime 101 stumbled in the number 3 spot with $15.1 million from 3,161 locations over the weekend and a projected $17.7 million through Monday's holiday. Rivals believe the 4-day number will be closer to 15 million to 16 million. Internationally, the movie collected 12 million from 60 territories. It would be a decent start for R-rated adult-oriented fare, except that Amazon MGM spent $90 million to produce the film. Since theater owners keep roughly half of ticket sales, Crime 101 will need to stick around in theaters long after opening weekend to justify its price tag. Reviews are positive, though moviegoers are mixed, as evidenced by the B CinemaScore grade. Bart Layton, American Animals, directed Crime 101, which stars Hemsworth as an elusive jewel thief who plots high-stake heists across the Los Angeles freeway. And just to put in my own 2 cents, I think this all boils down to the fact that Chris Hemsworth has always struggled to generate box office unless he is wielding Mjolnir and playing the mighty Thor, and he'll be playing the mighty Thor in Avengers Doomsday this December. The only franchise of his that's done well outside of Thor is Extraction, but that's been an online success on Netflix. I don't know how much money Extraction would generate if it was just like a full-blown traditional theatrical release, but I'm sure his agent, looking at these numbers, is thrilled that Doomsday is right around the corner. But getting back to the article, Amazon MGM would argue that Crime 101 doesn't need to be a box office juggernaut in order to be successful. The e-retailer turned media giant has said in the past that it's only aiming to earn back its marketing and distribution spend and is looking to theatrical to elevate a film's launch on Prime Video. Industry rivals, many of whom also operate streaming services, believe that's a dubious explanation for an expenditure of this size. In the case of Crime 101, moreover, viewership metrics across all streaming platforms go largely unreported, so it's nearly impossible to know what constitutes a win in the streaming era. Amazon MGM, which has released the Chris Pratt-led Mercy and First Lady documentary Melania earlier this year to middling results, could rebound in the spring with Project Hail Mary, a sci-fi adventure starring Ryan Gosling. I should also add that in addition to Project Hail Mary in March, they've got Masters of the Universe coming this summer. Masters of the Universe will be the big test, and it seems like Amazon is very content with handling domestic distribution and allowing Sony to handle their international distribution for their movies, so we shall see what we shall see. But for my own part, I would love to see Amazon MGM at least have 1 or 2 hits in the theater this year to justify their big theatrical push with this big slate of new movies. But back to the article, Send Help, a well-reviewed horror film starring Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien, slid to 4th place with $9 million over the weekend and an estimated $10.7 million through Monday. After 3 weekends of release, 2 of which were spent at number 1, the Disney movie has generated $48 million and $72 million globally against a $40 million budget. With an assist from Send Help, though mostly due to the continued success of Zootopia 2 and Avatar Fire and Ash, Disney is the first studio to cross the $1 billion mark at the global box office in 2026. 5th place went to Solo Mia with $6.2 million over the weekend and a projected $7.8 million through the 4-day stretch. The PG film starring Kevin James as a man who gets left at the altar and goes on his honeymoon alone has grossed $18 million after 2 weekends on the big screen. Another newcomer, sci-fi comedy adventure Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, opened at number 7 with $3.6 million from 1,610 theaters over the weekend and an estimated $4.1 million through Monday. Sam Rockwell and Haley Lou Richardson star in the film, which follows a futuristic man who takes hostages at a Los Angeles diner to recruit a band of heroes to help him save the world. Gore Verbinski, best known for directing 3 Pirates of the Caribbean installments, directed Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, with Briarcliff Entertainment handling the theatrical rollout. It received a B grade on CinemaScore. In limited release, Neon's mockumentary Nirvana, the band that showed the movie, started strong with $1.2 million over the traditional weekend and an estimated $1.4 million through Monday from just 365 screens. Directed by Matt Johnson, the Canadian sci-fi adventure, which has nothing to do with the actual band Nirvana, follows 2 friends who travel back to 2008 after moonlighting as a group called Nirvana the Band and attempting to book a gig at a hip Toronto bar called the Rivoli. Domestic revenues are 8% ahead of 2025's tally, according to ComScore. That number shrank because a year ago, Marvel's Captain America Brave New World launched to $100 million over the 4-day President's Day holiday in 2025. Although this weekend was solid for counter-programming, there's pressure on upcoming releases like Scream 7, Hoppers, director Maggie Gyllenhaal's Frankenstein remake The Bride, and Universal and Illumination's The Super Mario Galaxy movie to warm up the box office into winter and spring. Although the lack of a Marvel movie made for a comparatively quiet President's Day weekend, a host of newcomers benefited from the extended holiday frames, as ComScore's head of marketplace trends, Paul DeGarabedian. This could be the weekend that creates much-needed momentum heading into the month of March. In any case, this upcoming week, sadly, I will not be seeing any new releases because I'm traveling down to Alabama from Thursday to Saturday to watch my little brother compete in an amateur boxing match. So it'll be high-stakes entertainment for me, less so for the rest of you. But I do have a video planned for the middle of the week about fantasy novels being translated into shows and movies, because right now, obviously, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is kicking all kinds of ass. I'll be reviewing episode 5 later on tonight, but just as a way of having something come out this week, I decided to do a video about fantasy books that might make potential good shows and movies, so stay tuned for that. But let me know what you think down in the comments below about whether or not Emerald Fennell and Margot Robbie made the right choice going with Warner Brothers, and how the movie business will be altered if Netflix is successful in absorbing Warner Brothers. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.